Novel Meets Evil is a true crime podcast where we compare literary characters from modern fiction to real cases to see what we can learn about human nature. You think you know your neighbors, your coworkers, your spouse, but the real creeps hide in plain sight every day. What's behind the curtain? What are they hiding? Do you really want to know? And why are you so eager to look? What are you hiding? I'm here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with looking. Just don't stare. It'll give you the creeps. If you're a creative, brooding kid and you read Poe for the first time, you're sucked in by the mood, the texture of his writing. It's more than just the words on the page set to paint a picture that we all know is just a picture. Somehow he lets you into his mind because it's not just a picture to him, it's real. Certain literary devices he uses become standard poeisms because he used them so perfectly, so effortlessly, that you never even noticed. I suspect Alfred Hitchcock was a master of suspense partly due to people like Poe. Looking at the sparse but potent language of Poe, he might have realized all he really needed to draw an audience in were a few well-thought-out, perfectly composed shots, like the exact right phrases. Juxtaposed, and magically the crowd is being played like a piano. Starting on Poe as a kid, I was inspired by each cool new narrative device he used, all the twists and turns, the shadows and light. But most importantly, the vastness he explored deep within his own internal world that opened my eyes as a wannabe writer. These stories aren't just about the horror, they're about him. What can he tell us about inhabiting the mind of a paranoid, haunted, heartbroken weirdo? I specifically remember as a kid putting down my book, irritated, saying, "I didn't know you could do that." Those are the artists who matter to me. The author returns to certain Gothic themes, paranoia, death, lost love, and doppelgangers, themes that have since become established pillars of Gothic fiction, demonstrating that, yes, indeed, you can do that. Poe would often revisit the theme of the perils of being too intellectual in life, in the real world, where worrying and overthinking doesn't get you anywhere. Yes, I finally found a writer who could convincingly capture the mindset I tend toward. Obsession, overthinking, catastrophizing. I heard a lady in the checkout lines saying, "Oh my God, I'm literally obsessed with this new margarita mix." And I roll my eyes thinking, what do you know about obsession, lady? Do you find yourself washing the dishes, showering, going to work, reading a book, all the while unable to focus on anything but the margarita mix to the point that you start to hate it as much as you once loved it, and you claw your eyes out so you never have to see another margarita as long as you live? I don't think so. Poe knew true obsession, and his misery gave us a body of short works, many more potent than entire horror franchises today. So we revisit Edgar Allan Poe. Doubles. Imagine a set of identical twins whose parents gave them the exact same name, Jonathan and Jonathan Jones. Imagine knowing them, interacting with them. It's confusing. How would their teachers deal with the problem? The obvious, non-creative choice would be Jonathan 1 and Jonathan 2. But what if they refuse to be labeled in this way? What if they just trade it off? As social primates, we want to know what the heck is going on, who's where, how to group and ungroup people, what to expect and how to avoid danger. The Jones twins, perfectly nice boys, would pose a minor threat because we don't feel completely in control when they're around. Their classmate Lisa called the Johnson house last night all upset and spilled her guts to one of them about another boy at school. But Lisa forgot to swear him to secrecy, so the next morning she's at school looking for him, and there they both are. What to do? They're not the same person. It's chaos. The word is uncanny, and it's why many sci-fi stories explore the idea of the doppelganger. Doubles are also a really easy, often hacky subject used by TV writers to get out of narrative jams when nothing else is working and General Hospital needs a quick cliffhanger. Ugh. The Twilight Zone did it much better, of course, so it can be done well. The Cylons from Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, are indistinguishable from humans, and this brings up major philosophical dilemmas for the remaining humans. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, that doesn't necessarily mean anything anymore. Space wars ensue. Speaking of space, in Star Trek, when someone is beamed from the Enterprise to the surface of a planet, let's say, they are obliterated temporarily and then reassembled at the target location. Technically, they create a different person every time they beam, but this technicality didn't prevent anyone from using the transporter. No crises of identity within the ranks. Well, except on the rare occasion that the technology hiccups and the beamee is accidentally duplicated, as Captain Kirk was on the episode The Enemy Within. What do you think they called the duplicate? You guessed it, Evil Kirk. Tangentially related, William Shatner, who played Kirk on Star Trek, also voiced the character Two-Face on Batman vs. Two-Face. Two-Face being the alter ego, taken literally. But I digress. The same thing happened to Spock in the episode Mirror, Mirror, where they choose to differentiate between the good Spock and evil Spock by giving one a goatee. And which one do you think that was? Two copies of one person is just fundamentally creepy. The great Johann von Goethe wrote about seeing his double in an odd, probably fictional, incident. He recalled having just left a young lady named Frederica with whom he had suffered an unrequited love affair. Outside, he looked at his horse in the mist before mounting. He could tell something was off. Goethe mounts his horse, a little unsteady, and begins to ride when, from within the mist, an apparition rides up. Goethe's exact double, except for wearing different clothes. It's funny that he determines his doppelganger can't really be him because he doesn't own such a jacket and a bright red scarf, because that's how you figure it out. Very technical. But this is how we rationalize in moments like these where we just can't make sense of what we're seeing. Much later in life, he finds himself on the very same road on his way to see an infirmed and old Frederica, and suddenly realizes he is wearing the very same outfit as was his double so many years before, including the same jacket and unique scarf. He makes a point of saying this outfit was not chosen on purpose, but purely at random. Interestingly, upon accepting in that moment that he was fulfilling some kind of life circle, the intense fear that had racked him during the first incident so long ago, which had indeed never left him all those years, flooded away and he felt calm. If it were a movie, he might have heard hoofbeats approaching in the distance as a romantic fog rolls in. And cut. The version of Edgar Allan Poe most of us are familiar with is the potent writer of the macabre, who, as it happened, was also a successful publisher, editor, and critic. His career and output is envied by any writer attempting to achieve both efficiency of language and also the ability to quickly evoke emotions, memories, and fears. I read his short stories and think, how the hell is he doing this? Where is he hiding all of this feeling in such short pieces? An actual novel by Poe would be as unnecessary as a pint glass of espresso. As a kid, I loved to read Poe stories, partly because I always related to Poe's many paranoid, misanthropic protagonists, but also because the dark forces he conjured up were actually possible in the real world, nothing supernatural. The fact that it could really happen, paranoia, love, heartbreak, being buried alive, make the realness of the spooky effects linger longer than ghosts or vampires. There are always exceptions to this rule. The effect of Greek mythologies or Shakespeare all include ghosts. Stick with me because of how foundational they are to every story that came afterward. But authors who really understand the human condition, especially as it relates to we, the strange of Earth, can make anything compelling. Like watching a real artist sketch 3 lines, suddenly bringing to life the face of the model in front of her. You don't have to be able to do it to appreciate it. So let's appreciate Edgar Allan Poe, shall we? Author, editor, critic, publisher. All of those aspects are true, but at the same time he was a miserable bastard who never really found what he was looking for in real life. His descriptions of people losing their grip on reality, hopeless in love, fearing lurking apparitions at every turn, is too believable not to be authentic. Tragically, like so many brilliant creators we love, whose work we rely on in the toughest moments, you get the sense that he's coming apart for our pleasure. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the price he paid in anguish to bleed out his body of work. Thank you, Edgar. We all know that in his mind there were images of candlelit catacombs, misty cat-prowled graveyards with approaching shadows representing what he saw as the inevitable torment and fear of life. I wonder, when he looked in the mirror, what did he see, and what did he feel? Poe's loneliness and disaffection began in his youth when a young Edgar's adoptive guardian sent him to a nice boarding school in England, the Manor House School, expecting him to become part of society. He also sent him underfunded to UVA to mingle with the old money Southern gents with valets, where Poe never felt he fit in. I'm sure he didn't. Gambling at cards led Poe to leave UVA in shame because his stepfather cut off his financial support. Defensively, I think, no, leave my boy alone. But then I think, of course he cut him off. Edgar once pictured himself being a gentleman poet, rubbing elbows with the greats, but he lived as a starving artist, basically a blogger of his time. He wrote his own work, the whole reason we know who he is, on the side. His life bears many similarities to the subject of this episode's novel segment, a frustrated boy attending a Gothic, ivy-colored boarding school in England. His name is William Wilson. Kind of. William Wilson. We enter the world of a young man who may or may not be of noble descent. This seems important to him. Look, I'm no Joe Schmo off the street. He's reticent to give his real name. I think he's ashamed of what became of him later in life, so instead we get a not-so-noble name, William Wilson. Whatever happened later, he feels it's wrong for him to accept full blame for his actions. You were never tempted like I was, seen what happens in the dark rooms after the establishment closes and the sinners emerge. Man was never thus tempted before, he says. Sure, dude. Oddly enough, there is another boy at the school with the very same name and who looks fairly similar to our narrator, which makes him uneasy. The other William's voice is different than our William. He speaks in a loud whisper, so there's that. But wait, there's more. This other William Wilson started school the very same day as ours and shares the same birthday. Already it sounds like a setup from Punk'd. It might actually be funny if it wasn't happening to him. Now he has to hear his name twice as often in class and deal with the ensuing mix-ups. Great. He no longer felt unique. He couldn't really be himself because he was only one of a pair. His double was the one person at school he didn't feel superior to. The other William, we'll call him William 2, notices the frustration in our humble narrator and comes to enjoy messing with him. William 2 starts dressing like our William, taking up the same hobbies, and even hanging out with the same people. This is so Poe. Obviously, the story isn't about going to a private school. It's about obsession. William 1 can't ignore the growing frustration caused by his doppelganger. He can't stand it and eventually, abruptly, leaves school. William 2 does the same soon after. Maybe he felt he had no more reason now that his nemesis had left. William 1 goes on to bigger things, attending Eton and later Oxford, but continues to dabble in sin. He was in the middle of a card game in which he was cheating another man out of his life savings. No qualms about that, apparently. When a figure came to the door, face obscured, and whispered something to the host before leaving. The furious host approaches William, catches him in the act, and bans him from all gambling establishments. Understandable, but William 1 feels slighted. The figure of William 2 appears throughout William 1's life, just in time to foil his shady, money-hungry schemes. The figure pops up again at Carnival in Rome right as William I is seducing and scamming a high-born woman. His double ruins that too. Now he's pissed, and he drags his mimic into an alcove and notices he has on the same outfit to the button as our fuming narrator. That's it. They scuffle, swords are pulled, and William I ends up stabbing his double full on. There's no way to survive this wound, and he must have been very proud of himself. A mirror he'd not noticed before appears, and he looks at the reflection of the dying man in his arms. But there he sees mine own image, but with the features all pale and dabbled in blood. But he spoke no longer in a whisper. In this final moment he conjures these words: "In me didst thou exist, and in my death see how utterly thou hast murdered thyself." I think sometimes we creative types like to recreate moments from our real lives, but revise them so they happen differently. We write a song about the one that got away, except in the song we get the girl. It sings better. This Poe story is semi-autobiographical. The school is based on the Manor House School in Stoke Newington, now a suburb in North London, which Poe attended from 1817 to 1820. He even uses the same name for Wilson's headmaster character, but promotes him from Reverend to Doctor. The church mentioned in the story is real, based on St. Mary's Old Church, the original parish church in Stoke Newington. Why recreate a moment from your past if not to correct it? Well, maybe to use it to creep people out. That's how creatives are. We're always noticing moments and details, images and lighting, camera angles, sounds, just waiting for that moment to strike. I'm sure Poe is no different. He created characters who served as proxies for the battles he had brewing in his mind, probably all the time. His foster father, where he gets the Allan in Edgar Allan Poe, was, according to him, a bastard who mistreated him. Create such a character and exact vengeance upon the placeholder character, because you never dared to do it in real life. Right the wrongs you never could. And William Wilson, the narrator, drives home, I grew self-willed, addicted to the wildest caprices, and prey to the most ungovernable passions. How could this not be at least somewhat a retelling of Poe's own behavior at UVA, getting kicked out after discovering excess drinking and gambling? Maybe I read this story wrong all along. It wouldn't be the first time. When I first read Stephen King's It in the 80s, I didn't pick up on the complexity of the themes. Lessons you can only learn as a kid, what growing up looks like to children and what it really is, and what truly matters in life, all packaged in a creep show of clowns and haunted ravines and terrified kids. I only remembered it as a horror novel until I reread it as an adult 1,000,000 times. Reading the short story William Wilson as a youngster, I walked away with that classic Poe dread. The realization that horror can exist even in a lovely English village while students play, and in the corner our narrator broods and obsesses and stews in his own darkening juices. The narrator was, like Poe, clearly self-obsessed. He only cared about what his double did insofar as it affected him, and William too picked up on this, seemingly exploiting it to bully the character of the narrator. I say seemingly because we only have the unreliable narrator's word for it. Here's an aside about bullies. I remember bullies exploiting my sensitivity to use against me, noticing that I was the highly sensitive weirdo they could torture, finding clever covert ways of threatening me that would never get noticed by adults. No way to prove that it even happened, and man, they had some great fun on our walk home from school. The little torments were always there. They accumulated over days and months and years on end. I formed memories, like dark vignettes of these childhood wars, that in all likelihood only capture my narrow version of what happened. Here's one. In home economics class, I sat at a table with a group of guys who hated me and let me know at every opportunity. This is why they sat there. I couldn't fight back against a whole crew. They knew that, and they loved it. One day, this one kid, Jason, picked up a knife, pulled me in close, told me if I told on him, they would follow me home one day and kill me, and then proceeded to slice a serrated knife across my hand, cutting down to the knuckles. I stood there in shock, seeing my exposed knuckle bones and connective tissue. blood rushed to my head, but the cut didn't start bleeding at first. I politely asked if I could go to the nurse. The teacher asked why, and I just walked out. As much as I wanted to, I didn't run. That would give away that something had happened. The wound didn't bleed until I reached the nurse's office, where I said I must have slipped when trying to cut something. The nurse stared me down skeptically. She put her hand on my shoulder and asked me if someone did this to me. I said, of course not. But she'd been around long enough to know something else happened. With her experience, she would have also seen in my eyes that I was never going to tell. I didn't want to die yet. Bullies provide people like the young me a mirror where we can see our weaknesses exposed and used for a bully's entertainment. It's not okay, but it's deeply human to torment each other just to see what happens. And as a good bully victim, I passed it on to kids even weaker than myself, and I'm ashamed of that. Exploring the human condition, in this case the self-torment exerted and suffered by the young William Wilson, was Poe's bread and butter because he clearly understood suffering. He must have been bullied. He figured out how to encapsulate these horrible and relatable moments like a Mozart melody, in fewer words than seems possible. But that's the literal read of the story. The second self motif, I would throw both alter ego and conscience in there. That is the B story. That's what it's really about. If we look at William Wilson too as William Wilson's alter ego in a Freudian sense, and Poe predated Freud's conceptions of ego, superego, and the shadow self by 50 years. The alter ego is the part of the self which haunts us against our will, but if we try to cut away what we hate about that reflection, our mirror image must do the same. William Wilson, one, by dint of his own inner corruption, has always been at risk for destroying himself. He moved all over the world to avoid his doppelganger, that damned true reflection, and it always caught up with him eventually. This is not Ebenezer Scrooge working it out with his conscience, facing his misdeeds, and emerging a better version of himself. This is Poe. I always knew there's something special about William Wilson, and it turns out I'm not the only one. Even years after the story, which was published in Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque in 1840, Poe himself wrote in a letter to Washington Irving, that among all his work, William Wilson was his highest achievement. It's good, but what? This is like Paul McCartney saying that the Beatles' best work was some B-side from Rubber Soul. That is good, yeah, but come on. Now, out of respect for him, I must revisit that piece and see if I can find the magic he's talking about. Maybe I'm taking his comment too literally, but Poe is also like Mozart in that nothing is accidental. No words make it to the published page or private correspondence with a respected peer that aren't there for a reason, and I'd like to know what he meant. Something about Poe's writing has always, more than almost any writer, transported me. Maybe into a quaint village with a church, a schoolyard with students horsing around until dark, when the lamps are lit inside and the shadows creep in, into one dorm room in particular. This is when I find Poe so tricky and why he's still one of my top 5. He uses these mundane settings and simple plots to hide his real interest, the exploration of whatever eerie thought jarred him awake at night. And creativity doesn't respect our schedules. So we get to experience that realistic dread with him. The paranoia and guilt I feel reading A Telltale Heart is not simply a little vignette, though, yes, it's enclosed in a short story. Poe was inspired by his own fears, little moments that creeped him out and he realized, hey, I could put this on paper. Does anyone have a quill? That's the whole point of this humble little podcast, to share things that scare me, yes, but really to explore why. My message to William Wilson? You can't kill off the bad parts of yourself without killing the whole organism. It's a package deal. And if you have to cheat to win at cards, you should probably stop playing cards. It'll catch up with you in a dark alley with a knife. 1999 was probably the best year for commercial films ever. So good that they should have suspended the Academy Awards for a year just to give people a chance to catch their breath. Either that or make 100 statues and hand them out to films that any other year would have trounced the competition. This is not hyperbole. If you don't believe me, just listen to this list of movies that came out in 1999. Fight Club, Eyes Wide Shut, Magnolia, The Matrix, Being John Malkovich, American Beauty, The Green Mile, Girl Interrupted, The Blair Witch Project, Boys Don't Cry, The End of the Affair, Buena Vista Social Club, Election, The Talented Mr. Ripley, The Virgin Suicides, Office Space, The Cider House Rules, Three Kings, The Insider, and The Sixth Sense. Yeah, I know. And like a bird dropping splattered onto an immaculate Italian suit, the best suit of all time, came The Phantom Menace. Block it out for now. Just breathe. Director M. Night Shyamalan came out of nowhere, kinda like the ending for his brilliant psychological thriller, The Sixth Sense. I was not one of the elite who saw it coming, but I'm glad. But I did notice something odd in one of the subplots. There's a girl who dies from an unknown illness who had been cared for by her mother, who had secretly been poisoning her daughter by putting drain cleaner in her soup. The ghost of the girl exposes the mother for what she is to her father during the girl's funeral, helped by our main character Cole, who talks to dead people. It's a heart-wrenching scene of revelation. The girl's mother standing innocently, almost sensuously, enjoying some finger foods as the father confronts her in front of the entire family. You were keeping her sick? He weeps, incapable of fathoming how a mother could do such a thing to someone she'd brought into the world. When I saw this, my mind instantly jumped back to, as so often is the case, an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, in which a mother named Marie... Well, let's just jump into today's evil topic. Marie Hilley was born June 4th, 1933, into a working-class family in Anniston, Alabama. She married Frank Hilley on May 8th, 1951. They had 2 children, Mike and Carol. Frank had a pretty sweet job, and Marie worked as a secretary, and yet the couple had basically no savings because Marie, who was hell-bent on appearing high class to the middle-class locals, spent excessively from a finite coffer. Of course, this led to tension in the marriage, but Frank couldn't say no to his pushy wife. Little did Frank know Marie had been regularly engaging in sex with her bosses in exchange for money or high performance evaluations. Now that's dedication. I'm sure that's how she saw it. Soon Frank Hilley began suffering from a mysterious flu-like illness. Then their son Mike fell ill with the same. Weird. Marie tended to them lovingly as doctors were baffled. Marie made it clear to doctors that if there's anything she could do to help, there's nothing she wouldn't do to help her family. Mike moved away to attend seminary, at which point his symptoms abruptly improved. Marie was overjoyed, though she still had Frank to take care of at home, and he wasn't getting any better. He was even hospitalized when it looked like he was taking a turn for the worse. But Marie went to visit and provide emotional support. In May 1975, shortly after a visit from Mike, Frank visited his doctors, complaining of nausea and tenderness in his abdomen, being diagnosed with a viral stomachache. In 1975, after returning home due to his illness, Frank found Marie in bed with her boss. He was admitted again to the hospital, where tests indicated the problem was with his liver. Doctors diagnosed infectious hepatitis. Frank Hilley died early in the morning of May 25, 1975. 3 years later, Marie took out a $25,000 life insurance policy on her daughter, Carol. A $25,000 accidental death stipulation took effect August 1978. Within a few months, Carol began experiencing nausea with no obvious causes. It was so bad, in fact, that she was admitted to the emergency room several times. A year after filing the insurance policy on her daughter, Marie began administering injections to Carol that she claimed would help with the nausea. She assured Carol that these would work, but made her promise not to tell anyone because it was still experimental. it was worth a try. Unfortunately, Carol's symptoms only worsened, now suffering numbness and tingling in her extremities. Medical tests show no cause for the disease, at which point Carol's physicians, fearing the symptoms to be psychosomatic, self-created, had her undergo psychiatric testing at Caraway Methodist Hospital in Birmingham. While at this center, Carol secretly received 2 more injections from her mother, who reminded her not to tell anyone about the shots. A month after Carol was admitted to the hospital, her physician reported she was suffering from malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies, adding that he suspected heavy metal poisoning was to blame for the symptoms. Marie panicked and had Carol discharged from the hospital that afternoon. The following day, she had Carol admitted to the University of Alabama Hospital. Coincidentally, Marie was arrested for check fraud for checks written to the insurance company that insured Carol's life, causing that policy to lapse. University physicians concentrated their investigation on the possibility of heavy metal poisoning, noting that Carol's hands and feet were numb. She had nerve palsy causing foot drop, and she had lost most of her deep tendon reflexes. Physicians noted Aldrich maze lines on Carol's nails, the lines that appear only after arsenic poisoning. Forensic tests on samples of her hair were conducted by the Alabama Department of Forensic Science on October 3, 1979, revealing arsenic levels ranging from over 100 times the normal level close to the scalp to 0 times the normal level at the end of her hair shaft. This indicated that Carol had been given increasingly larger doses of arsenic over a period of 4 to 8 months. Marie diverted them from this line of inquiry. It had to be a mistake. Nevertheless, that same day, Frank's body was exhumed and an autopsy performed, with his wife's permission. What? Upon examination, it showed between 10 and 100 times the normal level of arsenic, revealed swelling of the kidneys and lungs, bilateral pneumonia, and inflammation of the stomach. But because the symptoms closely resembled those of hepatitis, that was listed as his cause of death at the time of his burial. Frank had maintained a moderate life insurance policy, secretly taken out by Marie at the time of his illness, that she redeemed for $31,140. The jig, it seems, was finally up. It was concluded that both Frank and Carol had suffered from chronic arsenic poisoning, with Frank's poisoning being fatal. Marie was incarcerated on her check-kiting charges when she was arrested on October 9th for the attempted murder of her daughter. Anniston police found a vial in her purse, tests of which revealed the presence of arsenic. On November 9th, Marie was released on bail, after which she registered at a local motel under an assumed name and disappeared. While a note was left behind indicating that she might have been kidnapped, Marie was listed as a fugitive. On November 19th, a burglary occurred at the home of Marie's aunt, where her car was stolen, as well as some clothes and some luggage perfect for disappearing. Investigators found a note in the house reading, "Do not call police. We will burn you out if you do. We found what we wanted and will not bother you again." 2 months later, on January 11, 1980, Marie was indicted in absentia for Frank's murder. When they looked into it, investigators found that both her mother and her mother-in-law, Carrie Hilley, had significant amounts of arsenic in their systems when they died. The remains of Sonia Marcel Gibson, an 11-year-old friend of Carol's who had died of indeterminate causes in 1974, were exhumed but were found to contain normal levels of arsenic. Gibson was one of the many neighborhood children who had fallen ill after drinking beverages that they had been served during visits to the Hilley household. 2 police officers who had been dispatched to a domestic disturbance at the Hilley household also reported coming down with nausea and stomach cramps after drinking coffee that Marie had offered them. Cops. Kids. I know we're supposed to focus on the victims, and of course I do care about them, but I can't not be fascinated by someone who would think they could get away with these kinds of insanely risky acts on kids and cops, let alone people she was supposed to love. People with whom she appeared, to all outside eyes at least, very loving. She is often described as a black widow, but that's a little simplistic for her. We have to think about her endgame. She killed her husband for money, yes, and certainly would have used Carol and Mike as paychecks too. But cops and neighborhood kids? What's the benefit there? Would she poison the whole world if she could? Does she think she was providing a service? What does she tell herself when she looked at the mirror? Based on what I've learned about people like Marie Hilley, my guess is nice blouse, beautiful. And that expensive new eyeshadow looks great. No thought about her misdeeds because that was just background noise. And now to get to the reason why I chose her for this episode, about doppelgangers. Police and the FBI launched a massive manhunt, but Marie remained a fugitive for more than 3 years. And a whirlwind they were. A whirlwind of lies, manipulation, and, doppelgangers. So Marie made her way to Florida, where she became Robbie Hannon. It was a fresh start for Robbie. A way to escape her backstory and plant new roots. I've always wondered what it would be like to start over as another person. Seems kind of thrilling at first. You're not restricted by preconceptions, by what people used to think of you. When Julia Roberts' character escapes her abusive husband and sleeping with the enemy and begins a new life in a bucolic small town in the middle of nowhere, we feel the weight of her previous life lifted from her shoulders. It's cleansing. But not if you're running from yourself, right, Marie? You're never going to escape what you are. In Florida, Robbie Hannon met a man named John Greenleaf Holman, whom she decided she would con with her feminine wiles. She was a master manipulator. She knew a mark when she saw one, and she laid it on thick. Robbie and John lived together for more than a year before marrying on May 29, 1981, at which point Robbie took his last name. She was personality laundering, using her new husband as a tool to formally become a new person. You might say she was now free of her past, but I bet she wasn't ashamed of her other life anyway, only running from the consequences. The couple moved to New Hampshire to live out their quiet love story, right? At first, maybe. But you know Marie, she gets bored easily. Late in the summer of 1982, she left New Hampshire, telling her husband that she needed to attend family business and to see some doctors about an illness. During this time, she adopted the identity of Terry Martin, Robbie's twin sister. Yep, the imaginary twin sister of a made-up wife, Robbie. As Terry Martin, she traveled to Florida and Texas. During the trip, Marie called Holman as Terry and informed him that Robbie had died in Texas, saying that there was no need for him to claim the body because it had been donated to medical science. After getting to know Terry a little over the phone, Holman said he'd like to at least meet her and get some closure, something like that. She agreed, saying she needed to put Robbie's death behind her too. In November 1982, after changing her hair color from dark brown to blonde and losing a lot of weight, Marie returned to New Hampshire and reunited with Holman, posing as his deceased wife's sister. Robbie Holman's obituary ran in a New Hampshire newspaper, but aroused suspicion when police were unable to verify any of the information it contained. Holman's coworkers also had suspicions about his new sister-in-law, feeling something was off. A detective with the New Hampshire State Police surmised that the woman living as Terry and Robbie were one and the same. Holman's concerned coworkers did some digging and found out that the Medical Research Institute of Texas, where Robbie's body had been handed over for study, did not exist. The church that gave her eulogy upon her death was also found to be invented. Now, she knew this false information would be easily uncovered. How did she think it would all just work out for her? Some authorities believe that Terry Martin was possibly a fugitive bank robber named Carol Manning. This was later disproven. Cops who have the cop gene just seem to know when something doesn't add up, and I'm always impressed by that. It's like perfect pitch for social interaction. Their job includes being a behavioral health expert just from thousands of intimate interactions with people all over the spectrum of needs and personalities. They can just hear if one note is off-key. For the sake of normalcy, Terry took a secretarial job in nearby Brattleboro, Vermont, but was arrested. While being interrogated by Vermont state troopers, she confessed that she was not really Terry, but Marie, and was wanted in Alabama for check fraud. Kind of surprising that she would just come out with it, but remember, she didn't come all the way clean. It wasn't until they'd conferred with Alabama authorities to confirm her name that they learned of some far more serious charges, murder and attempted murder. Marie was extradited to Alabama to stand trial. Before the gavel could bounce, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for killing Frank Hilley and 20 years for attempting to kill Carol. In 1983, Marie began serving her sentence at the maximum security Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. She weaseled her way into a clerical job due to her experience as a secretary, handling paperwork at the prison. She was considered a model prisoner, well-behaved and quiet. Such good behavior afforded her a number of one-day passes from the prison, and she always returned as expected. In February of 1987, Marie was given a 3-day pass to visit John Homan, who had moved to nearby Anniston to be close to his wife. Terry, Marie, what the hell did he call her at this point? They spent a romantic evening at a motel in Anniston. When John stepped out for a few hours, she disappeared. She left her husband a note asking him to forgive her. I doubt she cared, or maybe she felt bad when forced to think about it directly, something these people can usually avoid. John Homan called the police, and a search ensued. 4 days after she vanished from the motel, Marie was found delirious on someone's back porch in Anniston. The good lady who found Robbie, Marie, Terry, said she looked scary, dirty with mud all over her and nasty long filthy fingernails, like a witch. The woman alerted police, who arrived soon with paramedics. Marie was conscious at the scene, but lost consciousness while being transported to a nearby hospital. Upon arrival, she suffered a heart attack. Doctors tried to revive her, but could not. She was pronounced dead 3.5 hours after being found. I love justice. If you believe in justice, this may cheer you up. The coroner suspected that she'd been crawling around in the woods during the 4 days of constant rain and freezing temperatures. The final cause of death provided was hypothermia and exposure. Her sort of prison escape prompted an inquiry into Alabama's furlough policy. Hooray! Edgar Allan Poe sets up moral traps that the narrator has to think his way out of, and we are reeled in because it's relatable. That works because the average reader has a conscience. For example, in The Black Cat, the narrator tortures a black cat, and when his home burns to the ground, the shape of a cat is seared into a wall. Now, this could just be his imagination, but his guilt is real either way. Another cat, also black, appears, and soon the narrator transplants his hate onto this one, and even tries to kill it. Oh, and when she tries to stop him, he kills his wife and hides her body behind a brick wall, only to be tormented by noises from within the wall afterward. When police follow a shrieking sound coming from inside the man's wall, it's as if they are his conscience come to hold him accountable for his crime. Had she come back to life just to take him down? Behind the hastily laid bricks, they not only found a corpse, but also the cat he'd unknowingly walled in with his wife's body, now screaming for its life. Was it fate? Poe's work is filled with nagging reminders of the protagonist's guilt. As an aside, and as someone who has written screenplays and read many books on the topic, where they tell you to burn the first reel, get rid of all the setup you think is so important, it isn't, and just get to the story, you've got to love how he cuts us into the story like we've been standing there waiting for it to begin. It's a device many writers after Poe used. Hey man, let me get you up to speed real quick so we can get to the good stuff. Occasionally, it may serve as an excuse for a lazy writer to blast out exposition in a way that wouldn't seem like what it is. But epistolary stories do this in the form of letters, like Dracula, where Stoker uses Jonathan Harker's journal as a way to jump right in. With Poe, we're right inside the narrator's thoughts themselves, which I love. The Telltale Heart is a perfect morality play that does this. It begins, "True, nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad?" You, the reader, don't even know who the narrator is in this story, why he has killed an old man and hidden his dismembered body beneath the floorboards, let alone why he has chosen to tell you about it at all. I just picked up a ringing payphone. Don't yell at me. It's like a guy sits down on the bus next to you and starts talking. There I was, staring at my house, with a can of gasoline and a box of matches, as the woman I loved was inside with my best friend, laying down to sleep for the last time. Maybe I'm simple-minded, but I love that shit when it's done well. But enough from a wannabe writer. As an example, my favorite doppelganger story begins this way.
Let me call myself, for the present, William Wilson. The fair page lying before me need not be sullied with my real appellation. This has been already too much an object for the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation of my race. To the uttermost regions of the globe have not the indignant winds brooded its unparalleled infamy. O outcasts of all outcasts, most abandoned, to the earth art thou not forever dead, to its honors, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations? And a cloud dense, dismal, and limitless, does it not hang eternally between thy hopes and heaven?
In other words, look, you don't need my real name. God knows my family has been dragged through the mud enough and slagged all over the world. Until now, I have no hope or future. Do continue. William Wilson, on a certain level analysis, is just a man feuding with his better half. He battles against a version of himself, climaxing with a fight to the death. In classic tragedy form, the bad William Wilson, number one, our humble narrator, can no longer harm the world, and the circle of crime and punishment is closed. Justice comes as he fades to black on the floor of a bloody alcove in Rome as the carnival continues outside without him. Justice feels good. I like to think that Marie Hilley, out there in the freezing rain, did some penance for her misdeeds. She had multiple masks, but does someone like her even have a better side? As she was shivering all alone, was she thinking, this is what I deserve for everything I've done? What kind of person kills her family? I doubt it. She was thinking, this shouldn't be happening to me. I'm Marie, I'm Terry, I'm Robbie. Doesn't even matter. I'm whoever I want to be, and I deserve to be free in the world, wearing furs and expensive French perfume, being wined and dined by some schlub who doesn't deserve me anyway. William Wilson, on the other hand, could not escape his other self, that nagging reminder of his guilt made physically real in his doppelganger. Sure, the split self metaphor is a little on the nose by now, but not almost 200 years ago. Reading Poe was like going to see Psycho in 1961. It was new and shocking and worked on multiple levels. Wilson's fate was sealed the moment he committed his first sin, and his whispering twin was there to notice. But Marie's twins were created consciously as costumes to put on to attack unsuspecting others. Her name wasn't even really Marie, it was Audrey Marie. I wonder if even a little decision like that, like deciding to use her middle name, was a sign of future tendencies. If I call myself something else, it's like I'm not even me anymore. How can I be held responsible if I'm not even myself? The phrase they use, in the heat of passion, where you lose control of yourself and things go blurry and tunnel-visioned, time slows down, is a real human experience. I would never excuse murder because of that, but I can understand how someone might get to that point. Ideally, when you feel this coming on, you walk away until it passes. Life lessons from a podcast. I'm sure that's what you wanted. That's murder in the heat of passion. Psychos like Hilley, con men and con women, send chills up my spine just as much as, or more than, the murderers we've covered, because they are completely disconnected from society, their families, from themselves. They create entire fantasy lives and alternate identities, sometimes have multiple families at the same time in different states, all thinking he's a normal dad, husband. He just has a really time-consuming job. Yeah, time enough to hide an entire other life and not skip a step. In their new worlds, they find closets where they can hide their skeletons. William Wilson, despite the sins he committed, contained as much good as evil. He knew what he was. He was conflicted, and fate took its bloody course. Audrey Marie Hilley may have gotten what she deserved in the end, but not because her heart was conflicted. Anything but. Despite Edgar Allan Poe's penchant for haunted hallways, neuroses, and corpses hidden behind brick walls, The man had a very human heart, beating loudly under the floorboards, just for us.